Welcome to the National Citizens Inquiry as we commence day 3 of our hearings in Vancouver, British Columbia, as we've literally marched across the land. Commissioners, for the record, my name is Buckley, initial S. I'm attending this morning as agent for the inquiry administrator, the Honourable Chess Crosby. I'd like to always share at the beginning, for those online that aren't familiar with the NCI, that we are a volunteer organization. We've just come together, decided that an independent inquiry needs to be held, and so we've appointed commissioners and we're marching them across the land. And more importantly, and if you spend the day with us, you'll understand how important this is we're giving ordinary Canadians, we're giving you a voice, an opportunity to tell your story in a safe environment. We're finding actually that for each hearing we have witnesses drop out because they're afraid to speak. Some are afraid of economic consequences, some are afraid of social consequences. And so understand that those that do speak, many are afraid, and many have said so on the stand. And when you watch them, you can see some are just terribly nervous. So we thank you for honoring them by participating in what they have to say. I do ask every time if you would go to our website, nationalcitizensinquiry.ca, and sign our petition so that we have this appearance of momentum. I mean, most of you aren't signing the petition. We've got momentum. This is turning into a movement because you understand that you can't stay silent anymore. But we still ask you to do that and also to donate. Each set of 3 days of hearings costs us about $35,000, and it's just terribly exciting that we're able to keep marching across the land because you're participating with us. And then I'd also continue to ask, because we seem to be search banned on Twitter, so if somebody searches NCI, we get screenshots where we're not coming up, and then on other people's phones we do come up. Something's happening with Twitter Canada, and we're asking you to contact Elon Musk and tag hashtag NCI when you do it, to ask and make sure that there's no censorship of us. Before I go into my opening comments this morning, I just want you to know that I feel very honored to be able to give opening comments in these proceedings. Sometimes we just find ourselves in a place we didn't expect to be, and I want you to appreciate that. I feel honored being able to share with you the thoughts that come to me to share with you. Today I want to speak about choosing life and not death. We have been totally surprised by basically how many people followed this uniform narrative that was put out by the government and followed by the media. And witness after witness has spoken to us about how surprised they were and just how relentless this was. And equally surprising, we are in May of 2023. I mean, it's not like this is May of 2020 and we've only had, 2 months of relentless fear on the television, where we've learned through these witnesses that we're being manipulated with statistics and figures and percentages that were totally misleading and designed to put us in fear. We're not there right now. It's years since that happened. We are in May of 2023, and still the single largest problem that we're facing is that a sizable minority of us is still, including our governments and media, are still following a narrative that we have learned here in this inquiry already is completely false. And there is a silent majority, and somebody challenged me on, are we really a majority? And so I was pleased that some of the other witnesses have been saying, no, we're a majority, because we are a majority. But we're a silent majority, and that word silence is an abomination. We're a silent majority who know the world is messed up, but we're silent, and that's why that word is an abomination to us, and we should be shamed. We know that the vaccine is harmful and that program should be stopped. We know that the measures did not make sense, lockdowns, maskings, all of that. We know And even those of you that don't know, those of you that actually still believe in the government narrative, in your gut, you know that phrase, gut feeling? Follow your gut. We all have it. We have this intuition that tells us when something's wrong. And it doesn't matter where you are in the COVID narrative today, you know something is wrong. Your gut is telling you there's something wrong. And when these mandates, when we were having to give identification papers in restaurants, and you business owners and you employees, you were enforcing it, you knew in your gut it was wrong. You understood that, but you went along with it. You were in a state of fear and you were in a state of panic. But you're still in a state of fear and panic. Understand the world is upside down. I mean, government leaders are telling us what is coming, and we're experiencing what is coming. I shared with you yesterday that, we'd gone out for supper the night before, and two different people that live rurally in different provinces were sharing with me that literally the government is telling them how many animals they can have on their land, and animals need to be registered right down to a chicken. Total control of our food supply. Are you not aware that, 1,200 food processing plants have been burned down this year? Our leaders speak about starvation. They're speaking about 15-minute cities. I live in St. Albert, and apparently we're designated to be a 15-minute city. So basically they're going to block off the roads, with and we'll be in a mile city. Like, we're blocked off. We can't drive in or out, but we'll be able to walk anywhere in 15 minutes. That's why it's called a 15-minute city, and you can walk a mile in 15 minutes. They're telling us that they're signaling to us that we will have climate lockdowns, which is why we'll have 15-minute cities, so we can all be locked down in our districts. It's almost like the Hunger Games. And it will be like the Hunger Games because we will be hungry, unless we like the crickets that they're telling us that they're going to be feeding us. And they're signaling to us another pandemic is coming. And people are aware that they're signaling this. Parents are aware that kids are being taught things in school that are undermining the families. We still have censorship. We still have hatred. We still have division. We understand that the world has gone sideways and is upside down. And the question is why have a large number of us gone along with this tyranny, and why are we still going along with this tyranny? And I use the word tyranny deliberately. Tyranny just means unfettered discretion. That's all it means. And if we follow a single narrative to the exclusion of all other voices, that's tyranny. That's unfettered discretion. We're not even allowed to have a different voice. The media isn't allowed to report on anything else. And we have to do exactly what the government says. That's participating in tyranny. Now, why? Why have we done this? Well, some of the witnesses have told us, clearly, job security. We had a doctor yesterday on the stand saying, he's got a doctor friend who got jabbed. He knew all about this. He knew everything. But listen, he's got $1 million house and he's got kids in private school. We've had vaccine injured persons tell us, I had to for economic purposes. I have a mortgage. I have kids. I have to feed them. Some people told us, I want to travel. I wanted to go to restaurants. I just wanted things to be back to normal. And some want to be good citizens. In Manitoba, you know how we're playing these clips of what the government was saying on TV in the particular province that we're in. The government was using the words ambassador. They set up programs in Manitoba, snitch lines, for you to be a good ambassador and tell on your neighbor. And a lot of people bought into that, and they actually thought that they were doing a social service. Many just did it because they were so afraid. And many did it because they chose to hate. And at what cost? At what cost have we done this? I want to just share with you my journey in this COVID experience. I've mentioned it before. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I didn't start the pandemic in a place of personal strength. And when they started with their fear porn, We literally had to make a decision in our house to turn the TV off after about a month, because we just found ourselves in an absolute state of fear. And it took about a month for the spell from the TV to wear off. It doesn't happen right away. And as I saw my country and the world basically becoming a police state, and police states across the world, I really fell into a state of despair. I've spent my entire life trying to slow the machine down, trying to eke out whatever little rights that the courts would tolerate us having. And I felt despair over just watching us fall into tyranny. And I felt helpless. I felt helpless to do anything, which is an awful state of mind. I didn't believe that I could stand up. I actually didn't believe that I could stand up. So I'm not even getting at a point in my mind where I'm willing to accept a cost. I found myself in the situation where I was not free to be the man that I believed that I should be. I had shared at an earlier opening that all of us have felt at some point in our life that we were here for something important, that we were here, we had a purpose. I was definitely not feeling that I was living my purpose. I was in a situation where I was imprisoned by my fear. And it is my fear. And when you're afraid, it's your fear. It's just an emotional state that you actually choose to be in. And you can choose to leave that state. And then for me, it was the truckers. They started driving across the land. And as they drove, people would just line the highways and the bridges and encourage them. And I saw that it can be done. It's possible to stand up. They set an example. Now, they've paid the cost. Some of them are under strict court restrictions. Some are in jail. We basically have political prisoners and political trials in Canada because you and I are allowing that to happen. And let's make no mistake, we have political prisoners and political criminal proceedings occurring in Canada right now because you and I are allowing it to continue in May of 2023. We're responsible, you and I. So the truckers have paid the cost. But what you need to understand is you're going to pay the cost too. There's a bill that needs to be paid, and you're going to pay it. Now you have a choice which bill you're going to get. You see, you can get to have to pay the cost of standing up and being the person that you're here to be. And there will be a cost. It's gone too far. So you can pay that cost. Or you can pay the cost of doing nothing, of not acting. Now, the cost of not acting is now going to be larger than the cost of acting. But make no mistake, and I'd shared this biblical phrase at an earlier opening, but we're basically don't be fooled. Like, God's not mocked. You will reap what you sow. And for those that didn't hear that opening, let me just explain the meaning. So it's just using an agricultural analogy to point out that what you invest your life in is what you get back. So, you reap what you sow. If you plant wheat in a field, so if you sow wheat, you're going to harvest wheat. You're going to reap wheat. If you sow Canadian thistles in a field, so if you plant them, then at harvest time, that's what you're going to get. You're going to reap what you sow. And so when I said at the opening that this is about choosing life, not death, I just wanted to take that analogy a little further. So, and where that phrase comes from, and again, it's it's a fundamental story in the Bible. Or I shouldn't say it's a story, it's a recording of what happened. So after God had led the children of Israel out of Egypt, and you got to read the story, it blow your mind what happened, but like just miracle after miracle after miracle to get them into the wilderness. And Moses goes up Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments from God, and he comes down, and the children of Israel have already rebelled. And so it comes down to decision time, and God through Moses basically, everyone sits down and they're instructed. You have a choice. God's putting before you. You can choose life and follow his commandments, or you can choose death. And they're not even talking about spiritual life or death. They're talking about literal life and death. I've shared with you how, the second commandment really is a summary of all these rules and regulations that they refer to as the law. And the second commandment just simply is that you are to love your neighbor like yourself. So basically, you're to treat others in the exact same way that you want to be treated. And that's the basis of our entire law. And so they were faced with this decision. You choose life or you choose death. So you basically love God and follow the second commandment and enjoy life. And I've explained to you how societies that are based on the second commandment, and our society was based on the second commandment, it's the only way to structure a society to have maximum freedom. And with this choice in front of us, what is the cost of following tyranny? Of not following the second commandment, of not basing our lives on the second commandment? What is the cost of living hate? Because the opposite of love, if you're not going to love your neighbor, then you hate your neighbor. And you're going to reap what you sow. And so what is it like right now for that silent minority that is continuing to pretend and believe the government narrative? What's the cost to you of living a lie? I mean, those of us that don't believe the narrative, there's a cost to us for living a lie. What's the cost of living in hatred? What's the cost of us not standing up against what's happening politically? I mean, are we really willing to tolerate our children being undermined in schools and the consequences of that? Are we willing to tolerate 15-minute cities, climate lockdowns, more pandemic lockdowns, digital currencies, digital IDs? What's the cost of this? Because there is going to be cost. We're going to pay it. What's the cost of basically accepting the principle that the government can force us to take a medical treatment, be it a vaccine or anything else? We've set the precedent. And I've explained to you that there's only two groups that don't have the right to choose to refuse a medical treatment, and those are slaves and livestock. What's the cost of this? What's the social costs of us continuing to live in hatred and fear? And if we think the last 3 years is as bad as it can get on a social cost, I think we're mistaken. The thing that gets me is that here we are in May of 2023, and in every province across Canada today, we are going to inject children with a COVID-19 vaccine. And I've learned at this inquiry that children basically have a zero risk of dying or being hospitalized by COVID-19. Literally, they're more likely to be struck by lightning than to die of COVID. There's no justification at all. But I've also learned at this inquiry quite clearly that the vaccine is harming and killing children. I've never in my life witnessed children dropping dead at sports activities, basketball games and volleyball games and soccer games. This is murder. This is culpable homicide that we're participating in, and we have blood on our hands. All of us have blood on our hands. And it causes us moral distress when we participate, and we're participating by our silence. It causes us moral distress when we do harm to others and when we allow harm to be done to others. It causes us moral distress when we don't follow the second commandment and treat others like we want to be treated. It literally eats our soul. Now, your actions show who you are. You can say whatever you want, but your actions show who you are. And I have a question for you. Who are you right now? If you were to go look in the mirror, who are you? Are you a slave to fear like I was? You know, every single one of us, we leave this life exactly who we are when we leave. So when you die, you are exactly who you are when you die. You're not a person that you were the day before. You're not a person that you were 10 years before. You're not the person you were when you were a child. You are exactly who you are when you die. And you will be weighed on the scales for exactly who you are when you die. And I think time is short for us to turn this around. And so I want to share a story I shared at an earlier opening, not in this city, and close with it. But when I was guessing 12 or 13, I was at the public library in Saskatoon and witnessed a viewing of a war film. So it was a Second World War film. Black and white, no sound, and all scratchy and old. And it was taken by the German army in Eastern Europe. So it would be an army cameraman, and it wasn't a propaganda film. It was just, armies record actually what happens for their own records. And what the film depicted was basically a group of civilians were lined up against a wall for a firing squad, and then a group of German soldiers were lined up to do the firing squad. And apparently what had happened is there was, partisan activity against the German army. And so civilians had been rounded up for execution in retribution for partisan attacks. So it's not that these people had participated in it. This was just terror campaign against the civilian population. It was murder. And again, there's no sound. So you don't hear the order, but there had to be an order to, raise the rifles, because in this line of soldiers, all the soldiers raised the rifles, except for one. One soldier didn't raise his rifle. And so you see there had to be an order to lower the rifles, because the officer wanted to go and talk to this guy and didn't want to walk in front of rifles. And you go and you see there's a conversation. And again, there's no sound. You don't know what's being said. But what happens next is the soldier lays his rifle on the ground. And he walks to the wall with the civilians. And then the rifles are raised again, and the rifles are fired, and everyone at the wall falls down. Now, there were a number of German soldiers there. There was the one that made the decision that he was not going to participate in murdering civilians. And then there were the soldiers that made the decision that they were going to participate in murdering civilians. And I have two questions about this, because we have two groups of soldiers. Who's doing better now? see, the soldiers that fired and murdered, they did that out of fear. But who's doing better now? And all of those soldiers will be dead. That would be 80 years ago. Literally, it'll be 80 years ago that happened. Who died free? Which soldiers died as free men? So it's interesting, as that's a video that is 80 years old, and it's affecting us today, that soldier who wouldn't have any inkling about us or the type of society that we live in or what we're facing is speaking to us now. And we have to make a decision, like that soldier had to make a decision of who we are. And I'm just going to stop there.